I don't hate this job. I just hate the feeling of being small every time I do it." That phrase, seemingly just a casual complaint behind the airplane curtain, became the spark that ignited a quiet revolution within a massive airline. No one on that flight realized that the man quietly sitting in seat 34B was the one who had created the very system that was wearing them out. But it was in that cramped cabin amidst the sighs and the heartfelt words of exhausted people that Ethan Caldwell, CEO of HorizonJet, awakened. This wasn't just a flight. This was a journey back to humanity starting from an ordinary seat, but leading to extraordinary change. If you believe that empathy can save an entire system, like share and subscribe to the channel. What happens when a CEO accidentally experiences the very system they created and hears something that forces them to change everything? Ethan Caldwell leaned his head back against the car seat. His gaze fixed on the rain-soaked runway ahead, private jets sat motionless under the gray sky, their lights reflecting off the water on the windows. His own private jet was also stationary in the Rainford International Airport. A technical malfunction, bad weather, or both. He couldn't even tell anymore. A bitter paradox, the CEO of HorizonJet. Yet tonight, he couldn't take off. He checked his phone. The only commercial flight still heading to Lexham City in the next 2 hours was his own airline flight number, HJ451, overbooked, almost full. Only a middle seat remained in economy class. Ethan sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. Economy class. It had been a long time since he'd sat there, not because of arrogance, at least that's what he told himself, but because time is money and private flights are a quicker, quieter option. But tonight, the choice was simple. Go home or get stuck at the airport. He booked the ticket. Less than an hour later, he silently walked down the cramped jet bridge, the pale fluorescent lights flickering. The smell of recycled air mixed with old coffee hung around him. The line of passengers slowly moved forward. A flight attendant offered a faint smile and nodded, directing him to the back of the plane. Ethan said nothing, lowering his baseball cap to hide his face, and continued walking. Seat 34B, the middle seat, wedged between a hoodie-wearing student and an elderly man who seemed to be constantly coughing. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, the tray table sticky and uncomfortable. The space was suffocating, devoid of both breathing room and the ability to think. A child was crying somewhere behind him. A flight attendant passed by her eyes, tired, her voice flat. "Please stow your luggage, sir." Ethan glanced around. Tension silently filled the cabin. Everyone seemed irritable, tired, as if they were forgotten. The airplane, his brainchild, now just a cold transactional machine. He'd read surveys, seen feedback, but now, sitting here cramped anonymous, he truly felt it. The plane began to taxi. Ethan reached out to find a place to rest his arm, but it was already taken. The student didn't seem to care. The elderly man on his left had dozed off, his head tilting intermittently. Ethan sighed. Tonight, he was no longer the CEO. He was just a name on seat 34B, and perhaps that was exactly what he needed. Sometimes, in order to see the truth, one must sit in the same place they have directed others to sit. He adjusted his posture for the 4th time, trying to find a position that relieved the pain in his back. The seat was cramped, the cushion sagging, his knees pressed tightly against the tray table in front of him, causing him to feel every vibration of the plane. To his left, the elderly man was still sleeping, his earbuds loosely in place, his mouth slightly ajar. To his right, the student was still glued to his phone, his elbows monopolizing both armrests as if declaring ownership. Ethan didn't complain. He couldn't. He wasn't here to be recognized. No one in the cabin knew they were sitting next to the very person who had approved the design of this airplane, the one who had agreed to reduce the size of the seats just to add another row to the cabin. The paradox pressed heavily on his chest, heavier than the pressure in the cabin. The plane climbed higher. The lights dimming, the baby 2 rows behind cried louder. The student sighed. A woman across the aisle fumbled with an oxygen mask for her father, while the flight attendant passed by paying no attention. Ethan watched quietly. Each person on this flight was just trying to get through, not seeking comfort, simply hoping for it all to end. He reached for the magazine tucked in the seatback pocket, but felt something sticky and orange. He dropped it. Looking around, he saw coffee stains on the tray table, the overhead bins stuffed full, and the faces of everyone looking drained as if waiting for something. A little attention, a simple inquiry. The seatbelt sign went off. The service cart rolled by like clockwork. No eye contact, no genuine smiles, chicken or noodles. A flight attendant asked quietly, "Just water, please." Ethan replied. The cup arrived with half a napkin stuck to the bottom. "Sorry," the flight attendant mumbled flatly and continued walking. Ethan looked at the cup, then at his own reflection in the window. Was this the image of his company? An airline that transported people without caring about them? A brand that once promised comfort, now reduced to flying boxes? He adjusted again. The student beside him still hadn't looked up. The elderly man on his left coughed dry and heavy. Ethan silently fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a tissue and handed it over. The elderly man opened his eyes in surprise, nodded in thanks, then smiled. The first smile during the entire flight. Not as a CEO, but as a human connecting with another human. True feedback doesn't come in meetings. It echoes through the murmurs in the cabin. The overhead lights flickered as the plane reached cruising altitude. A flight attendant returned to collect the trash. Her movements were stiff mechanical. Ethan stretched his back lightly. The pain in his spine still lingering with every slight turbulence. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, but before he could rest, a sharp voice from a few rows back interrupted. They used to care. Now it's just fees and fake smiles. Ethan opened his eyes, listening. "I'm serious," the man continued. 3 years ago, they lost my luggage. At least they apologized with a handwritten letter and a voucher. Last month, I had to wait 4 hours. Got nothing but a QR code card. Another voice chimed in. "Same here. Now everything costs money. I bet even breathing will start costing soon." Laughter erupted, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion mixed with helplessness. Ethan didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. These are the sounds the company has never heard. Not in surveys and not through scripted customer service calls. At 30,000 feet, people speak the truth. And in a few rows ahead, a young mother struggles with her baby in her arms, her diaper bag slung awkwardly over her shoulder, trying to pour formula with one hand, while her older child continuously kicks the seat in front of them. A flight attendant passes by, glances over, and walks on. No offer of help. No sympathetic look. Just a mindless repetition of routine. The mother sighs in exhaustion, muttering as if trying to keep from breaking down. Ethan Caldwell watches as she struggles to soothe the baby, searching for a pacifier. No one helps. Not a single gaze in her direction, until the woman sitting next to her gently extends a hand. "I've been where you are." She opens her bag, pulls out a small packet of wipes and a soft toy, handing them over. The mother blinks her eyes, welling up with tears. She nods and whispers, "Thank you." Ethan feels something drop in his chest. The passengers were helping each other because the airline wasn't doing it. From behind, the voice of the man earlier rings out again. "Don't talk to me about that CEO. What's his name again? Sutherland, right? I bet he hasn't sat in economy class since 2005. Ethan clamps his mouth shut, pursing his lips. He can't argue. They're right. He's read the reports, seen the numbers, but nothing reflects the sensation now surrounding him. The suffocating air, the smell of old plastic, and the tired faces keeping the whole system from collapsing. He tilts his head, looking down the aisle. A company doesn't fall apart overnight. It decays bit by bit, from the smiles that go unnoticed, to the hurried hands, to the voices that are ignored. And tonight, for the first time in many years, he was hearing it all. The people who kept the sky flying were the same ones who were about to fall. Somewhere over the Midwest, the plane hit light turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and the flight attendants returned to their seats like they had been programmed. Ethan looked over and caught sight of a blonde flight attendant. Her eyes red, her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. When the plane steadied, she immediately stood up and pushed the service cart as if nothing had happened. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. He noticed her movement, swift yet rigid, as though she was operating purely on instinct. Another flight attendant passed by, rubbing her wrist while quietly complaining about the schedule. They didn't interact much with the passengers. If they did, it was just a few hurried, hollow words, as if each word drained the energy they no longer had. "Can I have some water?" A passenger asked quietly. "Just a second." The attendant snapped, then seemed to realize, "Sorry, I'm a little tied up." Ethan watched as she passed by her gate, slightly limping. Someone behind him whispered, "She's about to collapse." He didn't say anything, he only agreed in silence. Near the galley, two attendants whispered while preparing the snacks. Ethan only caught fragments of their conversation, but their voices were filled with tension. "This is my 12th consecutive day. No breaks, no sleep." They cut the backup team again. "We're flying with a minimum crew and still expected to smile like it's all normal." He leaned back in his seat, his jaw clenched. He recognized that tone. Exhaustion, hidden in silence, frustration wrapped in uniforms and name tags. He had heard these voices many years ago when the company was smaller, when he still answered every call, when he knew the names of everyone on the shift. But over time, the process had replaced the people. A flight attendant passed by and Ethan gently asked, "How much longer until we're done?" She blinked, seemingly surprised. "After this leg, we have one more, then landing at 2:10 a.m. That's a long schedule. It's always this long." She gave a thin smile, then walked away. He watched her go. A strange feeling spreading in his stomach. Was it shame or clarity? He had tried to keep the airline profitable, but he had forgotten that the people carrying it weren't just numbers and reports. They were flesh and blood, smiling with faces like cracked glass. Ethan turned back to the window. The sky outside was pitch black, the wing of the plane slicing through the night. The company didn't need a new media campaign. They needed to breathe. Sometimes the most honest conversations are the ones not meant for you. The plane returned to quiet. The lights dimmed. Most passengers had drifted into restless sleep, but Ethan couldn't sleep. Not because of the noise, but because of what he had witnessed weighing down in his chest more than the altitude outside. He tilted his head, resting it against the cold glass, and heard two voices just beyond the curtain near the galley. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their words rang out clear and raw. Two attendants off duty sitting in the jump seats were talking loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. And he was very close. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," a female voice said, full of exhaustion. "Me neither," the male voice replied. "It feels like we're invisible." They cut hours, increased pressure, and then send out mass emails like, "Thanks for your dedication." It's insulting. Ethan closed his eyes, but still listened to every word. "Remember when everyone loved working here," she continued, "when the CEO still participated in crew meetings, when we actually had real breaks, not flying through 3 time zones with a forced smile." That one hit his heart. The male voice laughed bitterly. "And now, it's a miracle if we don't make a mistake. If we're late with a coffee or snap at someone, we're immediately penalized. Meanwhile, we've had 4 hours of sleep, then another 3 hours of flying with delays." Then there was a pause. The female voice became softer, almost cracking. "It seems like the people upstairs don't even know we exist anymore." Ethan remained still. He had once prided himself on the company's culture, on the slogan, "People First." But when did that change? When did investor calls and quarterly reports overshadow the very people who kept the airline flying? Then another voice interjected. Someone walked past the galley. "You too used to fly first class, didn't you?" someone asked near the galley. "We used to," the woman replied, "until they started rotating us for consistency." Translation, spreading the exhaustion evenly across everyone. A few small laughs emerged, but they were weary. Then the words that made Ethan Caldwell stop breathing rang out. "I don't hate this job. I just hate the feeling of being small every time I do it." He inhaled quietly, opened his eyes, and looked out into the dark void outside the window. Those words felt like cold steel tightening around his chest. She didn't need luxury, nor did she need recognition. She just wanted to be acknowledged. To be seen. Ethan swallowed. He hadn't intended to hear those words, but perhaps that was exactly why they struck him so deeply. And maybe it was time to stop flying high to look down, and start stepping into every issue he had once merely brushed past. At 30,000 feet, it's easy to lose your way, especially when you're the one who drew the map. He looked down at the cup of water in his hand. The plane had stabilized. The cabin lights shifted to a soft yellow. The space was eerily quiet. Some passengers had nodded off against the windows. Others rested their heads on companion shoulders. The sound of steady breathing echoed faintly through the cabin. But inside Ethan, a storm was forming. He glanced at the flight attendants, noticing the dark circles under their eyes, the rigidity in every movement, and how they avoided lingering too long with anyone as if time were their enemy. He remembered the mother with her 2 children, the man behind him who had trusted HorizonJet, the flight attendant's forced smile as she handed him his drink, and the voices behind the curtain. Stories not meant for him, but now echoing in his head. It seems like the people upstairs don't even know we exist anymore. He had once etched his name on the body of the plane, once let his vision seep into every policy, once stood in line with technicians to organize supplies, once sat with staff at the gate when a flight was delayed. Back then, he lived close to the ground, in the most positive sense. But then, on his journey to the top, he had let himself drift into autopilot mode, and now he sat among passengers in seat 34B, hidden among them, listening to his company operate through unfamiliar mouths. Yet somewhere it felt achingly familiar. The worst part was, they weren't wrong. He recalled countless meetings, the nods before reports that said, "Employee morale is stable." Customer satisfaction is maintained. But those numbers didn't reflect the quiet exhaustion. The complaints swallowed down the passengers silently, helping each other to fill the gaps the airline had neglected. His own reflection in the window seemed foreign, as if a person had lost themselves after many years. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. The truth was clear. He no longer led an airline centered around people. He was running a machine that had lost its human essence. He looked down the row of seats where passengers were packed like cargo holding their paper cups of water, hoping to arrive on time. Among them, the flight attendants were draining their last bit of strength to keep everything from falling apart. Ethan reclined, but his mind traveled further than the airplane. He knew he couldn't fix anything while sitting here, but he also knew he couldn't fix anything by staying behind a boardroom desk. This change couldn't be a press release, not a press conference. It had to start with listening, with presence, with remembering the meaning of caring without needing to be reminded. He looked toward the curtain separating the galley. Something inside him had shifted. He boarded the plane as a passenger, but he would step off with a completely different role. Sometimes the biggest decisions don't need applause or a podium. The plane began its descent. Seats were adjusted upright. Tray tables folded away. The cabin lights brightened. Artificial light, not enough to chase away the fatigue. Ethan sat, still eyes focused on the floor, his hand resting lightly on his knee. Outside, the city lights sparkled like falling stars accepting their place on the earth. "Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing." The captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "Thank you for flying with HorizonJet." That thank you had once made Ethan proud. Now it rang out in a different way. When the plane touched down on the runway, he felt an oddly peaceful sensation, as if something heavy had landed at the same time. The ding sounded when the seatbelt sign went off. Passengers stood up, took their bags, checked their phones. Life continued. Ethan, however, remained seated for a long time. When he stood up, every movement was slow, deliberate. No one noticed him, not a single glance. Perhaps that was the truest feedback. He had become invisible in the very system he had created. Near the exit, the flight attendant with tired eyes and a slight limp was standing, thanking each passenger. Her smile was faint, her lips moving, but her gaze had already drifted elsewhere. When Ethan approached, he stopped. "Thank you for tonight." She blinked, surprised that someone was looking into her eyes. "Thank you." Her voice was softer this time. He walked off the plane. No revelations, no speeches, just a quiet determination, tightly wound beneath the calm surface. Inside the terminal, he turned toward a quiet corner by the coffee stand, pulled out his phone. The screen lit up as he opened his contacts. Without hesitation, he called schedule an urgent executive meeting for tomorrow morning. No delays. Everyone must be there. "Yes, sir," the assistant responded. "What's so urgent?" Sir Ethan looked out at the plane that had just left him, the one he had just sat on. He saw the ground staff moving briskly, their reflective vests glowing under the headlights. "About all the things we've stopped seeing," he said, "and the people who have kept this company standing while we weren't paying attention." He ended the call, exhaling a breath he didn't even realize he had been holding. Tonight not only showed him what had broken, but it also reminded him why he started flying in the first place. Not to glide above everyone, but to be there with them. Real change doesn't come from policies. It begins with the moment someone says enough. The next morning, Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of the long meeting table at the company headquarters. The morning light slowly filtered through the glass walls, casting light on the sleepy faces, some curious, others unprepared for what he was about to say. No formalities, no beating around the bush. Last night, I flew economy class seat 34B, no private room, no privileges. Just me, squeezed in like everyone else. The room immediately fell silent. Some eyes looked up, others leaned back cautiously, but Ethan's voice was firm, steady, unmistakable. Absolute seriousness. I heard it. I witnessed it. Not from reports, not from feedback summaries, from real people, passengers, the crew, a mother trying to feed her child, an elderly man without a glass of water, 2 flight attendants on the edge of exhaustion talking about being forgotten. He paused for a moment, letting the atmosphere sink into every corner of the room. They're not just tired, they feel invisible. A CEO cleared his throat. We're still maintaining service KPIs. Stop. Ethan raised his hand, cutting him off. The numbers no longer reflect the truth. People do. He paced around the table, walking slowly. We've turned this company into a machine. Tight schedules, smaller seats, fewer crew members, higher fees, and maybe it worked for a while. Profits rose, margins were stable. But I sat next to the consequences. I heard them. I felt them. No one interrupted again. He turned back to the screen, clicked to open the first slide. Altair Initiative. Rebuilding from the inside. I'll be conducting a full internal review starting today. Not for show, but for action. This includes crew schedules, service training, feedback processes, hidden fees, and the airplane seating charts. A few eyes widened. This was no longer about surface-level adjustments. This was a major structural overhaul. I want frontline staff to report directly to this office every month. No filtering. No sifting. Ethan looked directly at the HR director. We will double the number of flight attendants per flight, extend the break times between legs. Mental health will be part of our operational policy, not an afterthought. His voice softened, but it carried more weight than ever before. We don't need a new advertising campaign. We need to remember why we exist, to serve people, not to handle processes. The room fell silent for a long while. Then a quiet leader spoke up. I wish we'd known sooner. Ethan nodded gently, because I didn't know either, but now I do. He turned his back on the screen, looking out the window where a HorizonJet airplane with the company logo just lifted off into the pale blue morning sky. It's time to reclaim our wings from within. A company can only fly as high as the altitude of the people who feel seen within it. 3 months later, the atmosphere on HorizonJet flights had changed, not just in the greetings or the cabin announcements. It lived in the eyes of the crew, in the calm of the passengers, in the atmosphere that no longer felt so burdened. The space had expanded not only in legroom, but also in the way people treated one another. Flight attendants who once gritted their teeth on each shift were now properly rested. Schedules were adjusted, the crew size was larger, and the rest periods between shifts were no longer a suggestion. They were mandatory. They smiled, and this time their smiles reached their eyes. Passengers noticed, too. The changes were subtle, but they were present. The boarding process flowed more smoothly. The service had more humanity. The overhead bins weren't as chaotic, and the small gestures, helping a stroller, bringing a blanket to an elderly person, a genuine apology for a delayed flight, meant more than any slogan. And in seat 17B, the middle seat, baseball cap low over his eyes, laptop closed, Ethan Caldwell was sitting there once again. No announcements, no cameras, just quietly listening. He began flying economy class once a month, no notice choosing random legs on the network. Not for the image, but for presence, for atonement, for a way to get closer to the people he had once drifted away from. On that flight, he saw a young flight attendant kneeling beside a passenger who was afraid of flying, whispering words of comfort in a warm voice. Another gently lifted a suitcase for an elderly lady, then brought her water without being asked. That wasn't policy. That was humanity being given back the power to care. After the flight, Ethan stayed until the last passenger had left. He thanked each member of the crew, calling them by their names. The lead attendant, a woman named Tessa, smiled and said, "It's different now. We feel the change, not just because of the new uniforms." He chuckled softly. "You all are the reason everything changed." She tilted her head. "I think the reason is because someone chose to see." He nodded, moved by her words. At the headquarters, the dialogues between staff and executives had become a monthly habit, and Ethan never missed one. No title, no status, just stories, faces, and a shared mission. Never stray so far again. He had almost become the kind of leader he had once sworn never to be, cold, distant, and too high up to hear anyone else. But now, every flight, every whisper in the aisle, every thank you given sincerely reminded him of one simple thing. You cannot lead from above. You must lead from the middle seat. A man sits in the middle seat. No one notices him. No one pays attention, and that is exactly what makes him realize he has become invisible in the very system he created. That flight wasn't just a routine journey. It was a moment of enlightenment. It was a free fall into the reality that for years he had flown right past Ethan Caldwell, once the symbol of success, vision, and profit. But now he understands vision means nothing if it's blind to people. Success means nothing if it leaves behind tired eyes, smiles that don't reach the heart, and hands too weak to help anyone. He had once flown at the highest level where there was only champagne and silence. But now he chooses to return to economy class, where the truth speaks louder than the cries of children and whispers between rows. In 3 months, HorizonJet didn't change through flashy ads but through quiet actions full of humanity. A tissue handed at the right moment, a smile given at the right place, a name called correctly. And on every flight, Ethan reappears, not as CEO but as a passenger like everyone else. He listens, he takes notes, he feels, because he understands that leadership is not about sitting at the highest point, but sitting where you can truly touch the heartbeat of people. Ethan's story makes us ask, how long has it been since we truly saw each other? How long has it been since we believed that thank yous and apologies were just formalities, forgetting that they could be the lifeline in an ocean of exhaustion? When a company learns to listen, it doesn't just restore its revenue, it restores the heart. And sometimes it all begins with just a middle seat. Thank you for following this emotional story. If this story has touched you, if you believe that great changes always begin with sincere and quiet actions, then let's spread this message. Like this video to show your support. Share it with friends who are also seeking the value of empathy, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories that touch hearts and shake thoughts. Because the world doesn't need more perfect presentations. The world needs more people who are willing to sit down and listen.